What was the relationship like with your dad? This podcast, Military Veteran Dad, is brought to you by the Business of Fatherhood, an effort by me to help you become a better dad. By helping dads create a lasting feeling of change on the inside, help them grow through generational trauma, and by redefining the definition of living. There is more to life than being alive. To find out more information about this, head on over to bencloy.com or check out the Business of Fatherhood podcast on any and all platforms.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to Military Veteran Dad. This is episode 168, and this is part 2 of our transition series. This will be in place of the interview shows here during the summer. This is the first 4-part series, and we'll be doing another one for July and probably August as well. So before we go into part 2, let's go back just for a moment to remind ourselves why week 1 was so important. Because in week 1, last week essentially, we talked about your first transition. Your first transition was that one into the military, understanding those basic goals, your basic identity. Because that just in that moment of me reminding you that this week is essentially solidifying your transition out of the military. But it's phrasing it in a question that often we don't ask. And if we do, it usually leads to a dark thought. And so the question that we're leading with through this entire part 2 is, who are you without a uniform? And why this is an important question, because in the military, you're issued this identity. For the sake of this training, we're calling the uniform the identity, the core values of your branch of service, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. All of those identity traits of that uniform were issued to you when you graduated boot camp. It's even a little bit harder for Marines because Marine is an identity that never really leaves us. It's ingrained into us that once a Marine, always a Marine. Now, the other branches are kind of going that way, but for Marine, it's been that way for as long as I can know about it. And for us, just understanding that, like, we are still a Marine without the uniform. We don't need a uniform to be a Marine. But then also underneath those two titles, we still are a human being. And so this entire training, we're going to dive into how to handle this question, how to identify it, how to work through it, because it can be one that's really scary. And when it's scary, that's when usually things can happen and bad thoughts can get oxygen, and then they start governing your mind, and you can go in a place that you don't want to go. So first question that we're going to dive into is, who are you? Now, I've already been talking about that, so why would I say it again? Because who are you, really? Are you a man who loves sports? Are you a man that's a runner? Are you a man that loves the outdoors? Are you a man that loves gaming? Are you a man that loves YouTube? Whatever it is, it's okay to say it. It's to breathe it in, acknowledge it. Who are you? Like if they were to put a billboard on the outside of the road to your life, what would it be advertising? Who are you as a person? Another way to frame this question is not just who are you, but if you were to sell your life on eBay, what would be some of the features? What would be some of the benefits that this product would be having? Because those allow you to understand, again, who are you? And that is a question we're diving into today. So some of this really can get tricky because within the context of identifying who you are, and as I hinted in week 1, you might be running from something. And that running from something might be difficult to acknowledge who you are. Because as I acknowledged last week, you might have adopted this identity from the military so that you could become something, that who you were before was not someone you wanted to be. And so the military gave you this perfect box to operate in. And now you're trying to figure out how to get through it. You're trying to figure out, now they just took it away. And I'm back kind of like, what happened here? Well, understanding this question and understanding the power of those stories is really important. And the story of your life is always evolving. It's not fixed. It's in cement. And whether you had a traumatic upbringing, whether you had a traumatic life before the military, That doesn't mean that you have a traumatic life after the military. It could very well predict if you don't pause, do some intention, and work on yourself. It definitely could repeat itself. And it could just be an 8-year gap or a 4-year gap or a 20-year gap in this story known as your life. So when you're identifying who you are, I want you to pause and think about some of the stories that have been running on your life. Like, what stories are you, or what things are you afraid of that are going to come back into your life? Those questions are extremely important when you're trying to figure out what to do next. When you're trying to figure out what to do next, figuring out those stories that you're afraid of, even like labeling those fears. I'm afraid to be my dad. I'm afraid to get arrested. I'm afraid when I go back home, that gang that I left is going to want me back. That there's all this fear of going backwards and losing all the progress that you made. You only lose that progress if you let it. And you only lose that progress if you go back to the original story. Like I said, your story is always evolving. So in this case, what you're doing is essentially taking it and making it go forward in a way that's intentional, which leads us into our next point here. The next point that I want you to think about in the context of who you are without the uniform is your own core values. Now, in some cases, the military's core values highly align with maybe what your core values are. But I want you to go onto Google and Google core values. Most lists have a range between about 100. And I want you to try to find 5. Most of the exercises that go out there is that you just whittle them down. Which one's not you, not you. And then you just keep repeating that process until you get closer and closer to 5. Why is this important? Because your core values have changed over time. Your core values have changed with your story. When your core values change, these become your North Stars. Just like they're the North Star and the compass for the military. They define good, bad, right, and wrong. Well, you need these core values in your life to identify these so that you know when life is out of bounds. That when you've traveled away from who you are. Because the hardest part about taking that uniform off, especially if you use that identity to kind of let go of an early story, is you need to know what core values you're governing by. What core values you're going to make decisions by. What core values are you going to use to become better? And what core values are going to guide you when life gets hard? Because those core values are so important. I can't stress it enough. A couple analogies that I use with core values is they're kind of like the lighthouses of life. That the seas of life are always rough. Sometimes they're calm, sometimes they're rough, but sometimes it can feel like they're always rough. Well, no matter how far we go out to sea, we can generally see that lighthouse. Those lighthouses essentially tell us when we're getting too far away from the shore. Without those lighthouses, we might not know where shore is, and we were like, you know what, we drifted on shore and we don't know how. Well, if you lose track of your core values, you lose track of those lighthouses, it's so easy for that to happen. It's so easy for this to perpetuate as things go forward. So knowing your core values allows you to navigate your life literally on the seas of life. Always find your way back home to that safe harbor. Never venture too far out to sea where you're going to lose yourself. And again, it becomes something that becomes like this grounding force in your life that you count on, that you know you can go back to these core values. This one is going to get its own week in week 3, but I want to tie it to the core values component. And that is, what is your next mission? What is your next mission? It's often the most popular, I would say, transition advice or transition bullet points is we need a purpose. The military gives you a purpose. We have a defined purpose that we operate every day. And then once we leave that purpose, our life kind of just lacks purpose. It lacks meaning. And that meaning allows us to get into a depression and into this funk of sadness. So within the core values, within the next mission idea, you need something to head towards. You need something that wakes you up every day that you're heading towards. Whether that be a 3-year, 5-year, or 10-year mark, you need that next mission. That is critical. It's not something you can go ahead and skip. So we'll come back, like I said, in week 3 to what is your next mission, because week 3 is life is a million lanes wide. And that week, we're going to help you widen and see what those missions could be like. So again, who are you without the uniform? Number one, you're a human being. As we said before, you were a human being before joining the military, and you're still a human being on the other side. You are still just as flawed as every other human being. You are still just like everyone else. You still have the ability to dream. You still have the ability to love. You still have the ability to give. All of those things are not taken away just because you took off the uniform. Those are still part of who you are, which is why I tell you in the core values is those core values becomes the anchors so that you remember that you are a human being. Right below that, you are still a husband. You are still a husband. You still have a partner in your life that counts on you. That no matter how long your military service was, this person, if you are married, is your commitment to the end of time. Until you're 6 feet under, this person is going to be there. So don't fixate so much on who are you without the uniform. Ground yourself and give yourself some breathing room to understand, like, you know what? I am still a human being. I am still a husband. I can still be good. The things the military made me do, or the things I'm taking away from the military, does not have to define who I am. And you can guess what the next one is. You are still a dad. It's kind of crazy how often this one escapes people in this transition process. And oftentimes, many military members, and generally the 20-year ones is where this happens the most, they get fixated on the military. They get fixated on leaving the military. And they get fixated on repeating the conditions that they had the military outside. But they ignore this component of family. They ignore that, you know what, your kids paid a heavy price while you were serving. There's probably a lot of times you were gone and they wished you were there. Take this time to acknowledge who you are without the uniform. Incorporate where you are going to make sure that you're paying back that time credit card. That while you were deployed, you're borrowing time. And as a dad, this is your chance to pay it back. That wherever you are transitioning out to, whatever that looks like, honor the dad in you. They can't take that away. That's always there. Heck, this podcast exists because of you. This entire podcast of 270-something episodes exists because who you are without the uniform is a dad. And it matters. And you have this opportunity in your transition to incorporate that into everything you do after. We are human beings. We are husbands. We are people. We have feelings. We had broken promises. We have an opportunity to be a better dad, to be a better husband, and be a better human being. Because who you are without the uniform is potential. Who you are without the uniform can be summed up in one word. Potential. You have the potential that only 8% of the population on any given year has the potential to do. You are coming away with a depth to the world that very few ever have. You are coming away from the world with an experience that only a few have ever had. And you're coming away with grit to go do something, to take that fucking hill. You don't need a uniform to bring those with you. You don't need a uniform to write your own values. You don't need a uniform to have a mission. You don't need a uniform to have the best sex of your life. You don't need a uniform to be the best dad. And you don't need a uniform to be a better human being. These are things that we're all wired to do. And I know that this matters to you. You're listening to this podcast, this episode, this transition series on coming back to reality, to coming out of the military. And this matters. Who you are without the uniform, that is a big question. But I have faith that you can answer it. If you ever want help, if you want to give feedback on this series, if you want to reach out and have a conversation with me about transitioning out of the military, send me an email, ben@bencloy.com. But that is all we have for you this week. I'll be back again next week for week 3, because life is a million lanes wide. Have an amazing week, and we'll be back again to do it all over again on Monday.